Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the Denver Dzogchen podcast. I am once again here with Mr. Joe Wagner, and I am Damian Abel, your host. And today we are going to talk about sacred objects. And one of the reasons I think this would be a fun conversation is because, as I alluded to in my previous podcast, is part of how I came to know Joe was an interest in his website, Future Alchemy, which really is just this amazing plethora of substances and statues filled with relics and all this stuff that's really important part of the more magical side of Vajrayana as skillful means and supports for our practice that often we don't know much about here in the West, but they're an integral part of the tradition. And so maybe, Joe, you could kind of introduce us to how you got into these things and what you know about them. And yeah.
Sure. Nice to see you, Damien. Thanks everybody for being here. Um, First of all, as I usually say at the beginning of these, and I want to clarify, I am not an expert, but I am an aficionado. I'm interested in this stuff, and I'm happy to share what I know. But don't expect that all my views are going to be in line with the Vajrayana hierarchy and their positions, but this is just my experience. So as long as everybody knows that, then we're all on the same page. Does that sound okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Uh, you asked me how I got into it. I know exactly the moment. So when I graduated from college, I moved to Taiwan to teach English there. And when I did that, I had no idea what to expect. I was a Zen practitioner. I had been practicing Zen for maybe 3 years, and I had been living in San Francisco, practicing at the San Francisco Zen Center in Taos, and I was totally into Zen. And I went to Taiwan only to find out, which I didn't know. This was, of course, before the internet. This is in 1992, I think, that many Zen masters and hardcore Zen practitioners and other types of Buddhists, Chinese Buddhists, had fled the mainland with Chiang Kai-shek to Taiwan when Mao had taken over. And it's a tiny little island, right? I don't know what the population was then, but only a few million comparatively. And there was a large percentage of amazing masters there and a lot of practitioners as a result. Some of these, I mean, I remember when I was in Taiwan, someone came out of doing 30 years of retreat, if you can believe that. They'd come, around the time that Chiang Kai-shek had left and had just stayed in a retreat for 30 years, which is, something even rare in the Vajrayana these days. So through a series of amazing coincidences, whatever those are, karmic links, I met a Chinese practitioner. He was actually Welsh, and he had lived in Japan for a long time. His name is Steve Powell. Now he lives in Bhutan, where he works with drug addicts and street people. You wouldn't think there are too many street people in Bhutan, but there are a few. And he introduced me around to some people, and one of the people he introduced me to was a guy named Wang Yangming, who ran a little, it was kind of a breakfast bun place. They had soy milk. Hot soy milk is a popular thing in Chinese cuisine, and it was a vegetarian place. He was a Buddhist, and we got to know each other, and he taught me how to drink Chinese tea, and I ate a lot of his buns, and I would just hang out there. It was in a sort of an relatively untouched part of Taipei, so it's sort of an old-fashioned China, which I was into at the time. And I would go over there in the morning and drink tea and learn about what he knew and stuff and practice my Chinese, this kind of stuff. Anyway, on his little shrine in his shop there, he had a little stupa, a little brass stupa. And I asked him one day, like, what are you keeping there? And he said that a master had come from the mainland and had given him what's called in Chinese a shalitza, but in Tibetan Buddhism we call ringsel, supposedly from Shakyamuni Buddha. And he said, and the amazing thing is that this one that I had has reproduced, and I have 6 or 4 or whatever. And I'd never heard anything about this before, and I was kind of like, what? I couldn't process it. Anyway, he showed me them, and at some point he offered to give me one of these. And it's just a tiny white, the one I got was a tiny white ball. They come in all different colors, different shapes, but primarily round, and they're found mostly in the ashes of cremated masters. apparently, according to in Buddhism generally, in Vajrayana in specific, the body itself can be transformed through meditation, which is, if you take it all the way, then it turns into a body of light. They talk about, the Jalu Chenpo of Tibetan Buddhism. I'm just kind of thinking about how amazing this all is. Anyway, even if you don't transform your body into light or the various other signs, which we can talk about in Vajrayana that occur, oftentimes when the body's cremated in the ashes, you'll find these relics, and they're supposedly the condensed essence of the bodhicitta of the masters, which is the will toward enlightenment for all beings, the hallmark of the Mahayana and Vajrayana traditions. So I couldn't believe he was offering this. They have little Buddhist shops, or did at that time in Taiwan. I bought a stupa also to keep it in and put it in there, and I have it on my shrine now. But that probably started an interest in this kind of transformational object, transformational substance. And then when I later, probably about a year later, when I met Tulku Urgyen and got into the Vajrayana path, I found this is much more prevalent, not just Ringsel, but all kinds of semi sort of magical medicinal substances and different types of pills that can cause the practitioner to accelerate their path. So that's how I actually got into it. And I've never lost my interest in that. I like magical things, and this is one of the most amazing aspects of Vajrayana, as far as I'm concerned. It's also in Zen, but more frequently in Vajrayana these days.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, do you think that these operate on a combination of karmic tendril and placebo effect? Is it something like that?
It's a good question. I mean, I can only give my opinion of this because there's been actually very little study done. A friend of mine was in Tibet. Tibetans are interested in this type of thing too. Like, what is this? What is happening here? I'll tell that story about my friend later. But first of all, what is the placebo effect? Now they're saying that the placebo effect might be the primary effect in medicine. It's not that physical medicines don't have an effect on the physical body, of course, but the placebo effect is much more pervasive and strong than even modern scientists and medical practitioners think. And that's why the delivery of the medicine to the patient is one of the primary aspects of whether it's going to work or not for them, is whether they believe it. If they're on their own side there and think, oh, this might heal me, the chances are increased, right? So we don't really know what placebo effect is. Of course, the tendril means auspicious interdependence, and it's a Tibetan word for that. And certainly the notion of having something that is from, in my case, with my previous story, the historical Buddha, increases your faith, right? You're like, wow, this is really alive. Here's the Buddha. He was cremated. He had 8 casks of relics. They were spread out and put in stupas. Others were sent to different places, China and so forth. And one of the magical aspects of these balls, these Ringsel or Shalitza, is that they reproduce, right? They do this magically. I don't know, but I've personally seen it, so I have no question about whether or not it's true. And I know other people who have experienced it as well. We can talk about that later if you want, but there's something magical about them, and having it in your possession, whether it's giving off, etheric rays that are increasing our meditative practice, or whether it's just a belief, you're like, wow, this is amazing, whichever it is, and it's probably both, right, on some level. There's some magic to it. So yeah, placebo effect, definitely. Karmic Tendrel and the actual physical object itself and any kind of vibes it's given off, or whatever you want to call those. Yes, I believe in both. Double helping. So yeah, does that answer the question? I think they definitely have some effect. How the effect is produced, I don't know.
Well, it seems to me that Vajrayana completely is like a placebo path, right? Like you visualize yourself as the deity because you don't believe you're the deity, but if you did believe you're the deity, then you would be the deity. Something like that.
There's definitely an aspect of this. In our culture at this current time, as I take the temperature, placebo has a vaguely negative effect, like a bunch of baloney kind of effect. I don't think that's what it is. I think it is that we don't understand what we are at our core. We don't understand what makes up the world at its core. And as you know, I have a friend at Brookhaven National Laboratory, and they're building a new cyclotron there that he designed. And what is that for? It's for figuring out what the basis of matter is, smashing stuff up. What's below that? What's below that? And he's quite a mystical guy himself. And he tells me there ain't nothing down there. It's not, as we get smaller and smaller in the physical world, then we intermingle non-physical with physical, right? The forces are not exactly physical. Depends on how you look at them, right? Everybody knows this. It's got to be the same thing in Vajrayana, right? By training in these special methods of seeing oneself as an enlightened being, as a Buddha, then a transformation can take place that's a lot harder to do if you don't believe that, if you don't visualize yourself. So is it, again, placebo? I don't know. I don't like that word because of its negative connotation, but what I think we could say is partially mind manifest. These things are closer to the crossover between physical and non-physical than our normal experience of reality. So I think that's a little bit what's going on. And you're definitely right. There's an aspect of this in Vajrayana, maybe a great aspect.
Yeah. For me, the word placebo isn't negative at all. Like you're saying, I think science is moving in that direction more and more. I just heard this morning a study about they gave people milkshakes and they said to one group, this milkshake has 600 calories. And then the other people, they told this is like 100-calorie milkshake. And the people who had the 600 calorie, their ghrelin, whatever the hormone of hunger, went way down. Whereas the people who ate the 100-calorie one, it didn't. And so I think that, yeah, we're going to move towards placebo is not being a negative thing. It's really how powerful the mind is and how matter and mind are so interdependent that
Absolutely.
we can't separate those two. And that's why I think, dismissing things as like superstitious is dumb, because we're taking away a whole aspect of our potential support in the path. And we can use these, as you said, as supports for our faith, which will help us to get more out of the Vajrayana, because we can create a sacred environment. We can make our altar feel more powerful. And whether or not we believe the substances themselves have any inherent qualities doesn't really matter, because at least it's increasing our faith, which we know will propel us along.
Well said. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It is a process, and we are using everything we can. What is Tantra, right? Vajrayana is Tantra. Tantra means continuity, the continuity into all aspects. It's not just when you're meditating, and even your meditation is not just a one-pointed focusing on something. It's about your entire experience of your being. When you're awake, when you're asleep, when you're dreaming, when you're dying, mingling these insights into all aspects of our lives. And this is one of them, right? Having magical substances or power substances or spiritual objects around you increases your faith. It increases your thinking of the Buddha. You're thinking of your higher potential and what you should be focused on, as opposed to just following your habitual tendencies and karmic patterns that we've made through millions of lifetimes, right? So it's a way of putting the brakes on that and shifting to a new way of seeing the world. And from that perspective, it's incredibly awesome.
Yeah. And in my experience, the more you do, the more it works. Like having your Lama bless your mala or your statues or something, you'll notice like your relationship to that object changes. It feels different. And it feels more powerful. And that works on these really deep unconscious levels that we're not always aware of like how profoundly these subconscious cues affect how we do things. Like knowing that my mala has been blessed by several of my important teachers, that's affecting my practice every day, even if I'm not thinking about it.
No question. No question. These things, it's actually more subtle. Is it okay if I not change topics, but go a little deeper?
Yeah.
These things operate at a deeper level than our conscious minds. It is not entirely about belief. It has something is in the substance in addition to something being in our mind. And it's the interaction between whatever that is that's in the substance. These are all provisional terms, and our own interaction with it that causes that is the magical transformation opportunity. Can I tell a short story about this?
Please, please.
Just popped in my head. So after that trip, well, not that trip. This was much later now that I think about it. In 2003, I went to Nepal and Tibet. We spent a whole year traveling around the world, and part of that was to go to Tibet, and it was that in itself was an amazing story. But I came back from that trip in 2004, and I was at that time selling real estate, and I was sharing an office with a woman who was not at least overtly, she was not at all interested in spirituality or anything. A very what we'd call a modern person, a very successful real estate agent who was in that world. And she and I had a connection. Obviously, we were sharing an office. Nice woman, and she was asking me about my trip, and I don't know how it came up, but I said that I had been given some of this what they call sacred medicine, Dutsi, which is a kind of herbal mixture that's blessed in these long mantra recitation rituals, sometimes by hundreds of monks at the same time. And it's said to kind of condense the essence of that practice. And anyone who eats it or even has it around will have it will accelerate your progress. Okay. So this is like a common substance that I wouldn't say common, but if you're hanging around lamas, if you go see someone like Choying, everybody who sees him, he has a little bag of this and he gives a little bit to everyone and says, eat it right now. And it makes a connection, right? Tendril again. And also the substance itself seems to have some benefit, some magical power, even though if you were to break it down and say like, well, what drugs are in there? There are no drugs in there. It's just herbs. It's just mostly barley flour, almost entirely. But it's infused with something that can have a definite effect. So back to the story. I just happened to mention this as one of the interesting things I brought back. And she said, I would like to try that. And I said, sure. So a couple of days later, I brought in a little bit of this. And I mean, it's these little brown, they're like a 16th of an inch, these little balls. And most people, I don't know if I think if you gave it to 100 people without telling them what it was, no one would have very strong experiences for the most part. Some people might if they have a karmic link that is not obvious on the surface. Anyway, I would not have expected much from giving it to this woman. I said, oh, I brought you what you asked for. Here it is. You can eat it, and she ate it. I mean, we're talking a tiny amount of this stuff. And I had to do some stuff. I left and I came back in 10 minutes or something. And she was just sitting at her desk like this. And I said, are you okay? She said, what is that? I've never felt this way before. I said, how do you feel? She said, I'm just right here present, but it's like I don't have any thoughts. What is this about? This kind of thing. And I thought, aha, there is something to it. Because it wasn't like I was, this is very special. This will transform your experience. Not at all. I was just like, in a lighthearted way. I said, this is good. It makes a link between you and the lamas who made it. And it's good. And in that particular case, it was a little bit of a test in a sense, because she was not a practitioner, not interested in Dharma, as far as I could tell, not even a Christian or something that you would have a religious link, a very anti that stuff type of person. And whoa, she had a very profound experience. After a few minutes, she came back to her normal mindset and she was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. And you never know, right? It put a little drop of goodness in her life. So I don't know what happened to her, but I think it's a very it's an example of how these things can bring out latent tendencies we might not be conscious of.
Yeah. Well, it brings me maybe back around to stupas. So Denver Dzogchen is now in the process of building a stupa or having one built. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about this. And also you have a stupa project where we have tiny, tiny stupas that are all over the world that we can, so building a stupa is a representation of the Buddha's enlightened mind, right? So everywhere they are, they will help make karmic connections for people to the Dharma. So maybe you can tell us more about
right. Well, I'll start. It's good to know how these things start, right? It must be close to 10 years ago now. I was in Bangkok. My brother lives in Bangkok. He's lived mostly in Bangkok or in Thailand for many years. He's a consultant and has been there since. That's its own story, but for a long time. And my wife and I and he were out doing some stuff, and he said, I want to show you a special place. And we went to a place called, its English name is the Golden Mount, and it's part of a large temple complex called Wat Saket. Wat means temple, Saket temple. And it is the site, it is a huge mound of earth. I mean, I say mound, you can't conceive of how big it is. It must be 350 feet high or something. It's a huge mound where they originally were building some big stupas, and construction was not good. This was in the 19th century, and the stupas ended up kind of collapsing, and then they brought dirt in and just made it into like a big giant park or whatever. Then later they decided to redo that and turned it into another temple. So it's a big mound, and there's like some stairways that go around it. It's like a whole complex, and at the top there's a little temple. And I had never been there, and my brother took us there. He speaks Thai, of course, so he explained everything. And inside the temple there is a small, reasonably small stupa, maybe 4 or 5 feet high, from India. And inside of that stupa, there is a casket of relics that were dug up by a British archaeologist in the 19th century, that the top of the casket said, these are the relics of Shakyamuni Buddha. And the governor of Britain, this is before the liberation, obviously, gave it to the king of Thailand, this thing. And there's a picture of it with all these relics inside, and they put it inside the stupa. I had never been there. But as soon as I saw that stupa, I had a very deep experience of, now when I look back at it, which is a long time ago, of a special kind of peace that I associated with the inside of the Buddha. I don't know why, but I was really blown away. And I made this idea then, which I turned into an aspiration. I'm going to build some stupas. If this can have this effect on me, maybe such a stupa could have effect on other people. Like here we are in a Buddhist country, Thailand. So over time, it manifested as my urge to build various stupas. So right now, we've got more than 1,000, maybe 1,200 stupas around the world. And those are these little tiny stupas that are like, look like this. And contain actually a Ringsel that someone gave me from, gave me a small amount of them, these tiny ones that came out of a larger relic. And this guy collects them and lives in Singapore. And so I put one of those in each one, and the Dharma mantra, which is an sort of a condensation of the Buddhist teachings, and some other holy stuff. And I started a little website, which is yedharma.com, Y-E-Dharma, DHARAMA.com. And it's got a little map with all the places. And this all came, do we have another 10 minutes or so? Are we okay? This all came because I read a very short sutra which propounds this Yedharma mantra and says, if this is put in a stupa even as big as a fingernail or something, and placed it in an area where there are no other stupas, then the person who does that will gain so much merit that in a future life they will become a world emperor. Okay, like Ashoka, something like this, like a Chakravartin, a wheel-turning king that is like a Buddhist universal emperor. So it's a lot of merit, right? So I thought, what an easy way to make a tremendous amount of merit is make these available for people, and then they can put them all over the place, and they have. So yeah, I think we've had 14 or 1,500 made, and maybe 12 or 1,300 are out there. And some people, you're supposed to send in the coordinates so I can put them on the little map. They're not all on there, but they're on there a lot. So it's pretty cool. You're welcome. The listeners are welcome to check that out. And it's interesting, right? And whether they create this tremendous merit or not, we're waiting to see. But it's certainly a fun project. And as part of that, we also had 21 larger stupas put together, which I have one in my yard, and they're also spread around at Bakatoku's land and some centers in on the East Coast, these large ones. And then now we're involved in a stupa project with Andrea Loseries at a burning ground, charnel ground in India that she's been connected to for many years. That's its own story, and she's an amazing practitioner. But she wants to build a stupa there. And so we're in the process of helping support that and organize the legal stuff around it and that kind of thing. So that should it'll for sure be mostly done this year, but maybe not completely done. We're working with a Lama who just depends on how long it takes to get the stuff done.
That's amazing. Yeah, and I know it's I've heard it's important to have a stupa on your altar too. So that's another thing you could do with one of those, right? Is just put it on.
Absolutely, you can. My real goal is to follow that sutra and have people put it in some uninhabited place inside of a hollow tree or
Yeah.
underneath rocks or something, and make prayers that all beings in that area be blessed. This was my original plan, but to be honest, most of the people, they seem to be just keeping them on their altar, which people are welcome to do. Any place is a good place for a stupa, although above your head is not supposedly good since they have a suppression aspect to them.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, stupas are a whole topic. I'm not an expert, but if you want to be an expert, you can read this book, The Stupa and Its Technology by Pema Dorje, which is an out-of-print book printed in India, but it's got a lot of information. So
That's
there's
amazing.
yeah,
And
pretty cool.
one of them on the moon, right?
Actually, yeah, that's its own little story. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, please.
My friend Nova Spivak, who is a technology guy, a practitioner, a strong practitioner, and very interested in preserving world knowledge. He has this project to keep all of our knowledge a lot like in place. That in itself is a large topic, which I'm going to not give too much detail to. But a few years ago, he has these collections of all human knowledge, which he puts a lot of Buddhist stuff in there because he's so excellent. And he had one sent off to the moon. And when I heard he was going to do this, I said, hey, we got to make a teeny tiny stupa. And in that stupa, we got to put a teeny tiny piece of a Ringsel from Lama Norsok, who's a great master who passed away about 10 years ago, 15 years ago in Tibet. And one of his activities was apparently just generating these Ringsel. They came out of his comb, they came out of his teeth, they came out of his hair. It's really big story, but very amazing. We can talk about that at a previous later time, but I had one of these. So I sent it to Nova, a tiny, almost microscopic one, and he put it in a tiny little stupa, and he put it in his section of the payload of this rocket, and it is on the moon. How about that? I think it's still one of the coolest things ever. We've got a stupa on the moon. So next time you see the moon, you will know that the Buddhist teachings are even on the moon. Incredible.
Amazing.
So I personally think that's awesome. And every time I see the moon, I think, oh, Lama Norsok, you would be pleased and laugh if you knew that your Ringsel was on the moon.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today, Joe.
Of
That
course, yeah,
was
these are
super fun.
great topics. Yeah.
We have so much we could talk about in
Yeah,
all of
let's do. And then people have an idea, right? The whole goal of these podcasts is to inspire those who have a link to practice hard and attain accomplishment, attain insight into the true nature of things for the benefit of all beings, right? We
That's
live in
right.
such a materialistic, nightmarish world. To be practicing toward perfection for the good of everyone, how could anything be better? Thank you, Damien. Good questions, and appreciate sharing this with you.
Thank you. Talk to you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.